basically once you're a salesman, it doesn't matter whether you sell widgets, fireworks, music, or anything else. Or, you're always, I don't want to say you're always a salesman, but you're always interacting with the public and striking up relations. And the relations are what's important.
Hello, and welcome to Along the Way Life's Journey. I'm your host, Carl Buccellato. Let's get the next journey started. Hello, and welcome to Along the Way Life's Journey. I'm your host, Carl Buccellato. I've often said I have traveled the world and met many wonderful people. Well, my guest today has also traveled far and wide and had a very diversified journey. Yet I met him just a few miles from my home in Coral Springs, Florida. My guest today is Edward Joseph Pozzuoli, Jr., born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, a graduate of Brooklyn College, married to his lovely wife, Pat. They have 3 children, adults, but children. A successful businessman, mortgage broker and banker, owner of one of my favorite Italian restaurants, musician, music promoter, and a real estate developer. Yet he claims he only had one job in his whole life. We'll ask him more about that later, won't we? As well as motorcycles and Woodstock. Please welcome my friend, Ed Pozzuoli.
Well, good morning, Carl, and thank you so much for having me on this podcast. First, I would like to, wish you a very healthy and happy new year as we move forward, because it's the beginning of a new time in our life right now.
Yes, it is. And the same to you and yours. I know that it's an important part of our lives every time, especially when we get to a certain point that, well, I'm older than you, but we get to a certain point in life. Every year is a blessing, every day.
Yes,
you can't take it for granted. So, Ed, you were born and raised in Brooklyn, not too far from where I was born and raised. And you were born of an Italian family, not too different than mine. And we never really met. And that's because I'm probably 10 years or so older than you. And I lived just slightly far enough away from you that I would have probably known at one point your older brother, who's younger than I as well. And yet you and I both went to New Utrecht High School. And so, but it's a strange thing that we never met, but we did meet. We met in Coral Springs. You were the owner of a magnificent restaurant that you developed and created yourself. It became the hot spot in Coral Springs and in North Broward County, and was called Tavolino Della Notte. And you really inspired me with that, because every time we'd go to eat dinner there, you'd come by every table and you'd come and chat a little bit. And over a period of time, I came to learn this is a very deep man. This is a man who understands more than restaurateur. He understands a great deal of experiences in life, which I came to know about you. And we became friends and lunch mates. We meet regularly for lunch. So tell us a little bit more about your family and your background, and then we'll get into some of the other questions and things that I have lined up for you.
Well, as you said, we did grow up in a very similar neighborhood, typical of the lower middle class Italian Jewish neighborhoods out of Brooklyn. It was probably the greatest area to experience many different facets of life. Throughout Brooklyn, you may only have a small 1-mile radius to your universe, so to speak, but it's the entirety of everything you have. Your values are set deep, they're passed down through family traditions. The internal sense of right or wrong is ingrained in us through our culture. Through the neighborhood, there was accountability, there was a sense of responsibility. And it's a time of our life that I think, reflecting back, will be the greatest generation that we've known. And we've experienced the idyllic days of Father Knows Best as, we came through the post-war situation in the 50s and the baby boomer generation, so to speak, which I'm a part of. And yes, you did mention that you're a couple of years older than me. But, normally I would say we went to different schools together, but we actually went to the same school at different times. So, but we did have very much the same basic upbringing. And I think that was the attraction that initially brought us together as I walked around in the restaurant.
Right.
The restaurant was a midlife crisis for me. It was kind of a defensive mechanism when I opened the restaurant. But being in town for over 40 years and knowing a lot of people, it was something that I just jumped into. I didn't know anything about the restaurant business, but my learning curve was vertical. And the one takeaway I have from the restaurant, I did sell it several years ago, was that I got a chance to meet beautiful people and get into deeper relationship, as with you, and a handful of others that made the whole journey worthwhile in the restaurant.
Well, in spite of the fact that my waistline went up 2 inches after starting to eat there,
that means we were successful.
It was successful. And I really do cherish our meeting and our friendship. It's very important to me. You know, one of the things I often talk about the ripple effects of life. And one day we were in the restaurant and you came over and you started to talk to us about a gift that you had received from your son, John. And the gift was a subscription to an online program called, I think it's called Storyworks, right?
Storyworth, yes.
Yeah. And you were telling us about it and how excited you were to be able to have a format to create a written legacy for your children about your life and your experiences and how important it was to you. And I was so taken by it. I obviously said to you, this is wonderful. I'd like to see something like that for myself. And you very graciously gifted it to me. And so Storyworks began from John to you, and from you to me, and from me to others. And ultimately, it resulted in a number of books. This one right here that I'm holding, which you gave to me, is what it is. And it is your book. And in this book, which I have read more than once, and I find it says, Ed's Excellent Adventure and Seasoned Reflections. And I say, they are seasoned reflections because I can tell the maturity of the man who wrote it about the times when it happened, when maybe there wasn't quite the same maturity in you. And I recognize that because I walked along similar paths. So I say the ripple effect because this book motivated me to write a small book, which I did myself, and much smaller than yours, called Buccellato's My Memories. And that was the stimulus of me dragging out some packages out of the garage that I had for years. And my wife, enticing me, get at it, that's good stuff. And so I wrote another book, which you all know about. That's it right over my left-hand shoulder, my shoulder over here. And that's To Every Page is Turning. So
yeah.
I have to thank
which was
John
wonderful,
for my book.
Which was a wonderful story and kind of semi-autobiographical, I guess.
Yes, it was. But in this book, and like this podcast is, I've told you that one of the things I like to do with the podcast, I'd like to ask people to tell us about people and events that inspired them and motivated them to become something more than they are, and possibly to learn a faction of life that they could then pass on to others. And it's very clear in your book that inspiration and motivation started at home when you were just a boy. Certainly with your mother and father, from the way you describe them, they weren't heroes the way people think of heroes, but to me, they were heroes. They gave you values and they gave you examples and they set you on a path that was fantastic. And then there was your brother. So I'm going to let you talk a little bit about that.
Well, unfortunately, both my parents passed away at an early age, and I never got a chance to, shall I say, enjoy my family with them as we got older. But in writing this book, I received this gift on my 69th birthday, and I was kind of in a little bit of a funk that I was waking up. I was getting ready, approaching 70. This was my last year of my 60s, and didn't know what lied ahead. And I woke up one morning, received a gift from my son online from this Storyworth, and it was about writing stories about your past so that your grandchildren and children and other people and loved ones get to know a little bit about who you are. I feel at a loss that I don't know much about my parents, how they met, how they fell in love and some of the history, or my grandparents, because it seems like such a whole nother era. And we just didn't have the stories back then. So to be able to put my own take on life as I evolved uh, was an interesting endeavor and was very cathartic for me. For instance, I never really came to grips with my father's death. He passed away when I was 20 back in 1970. And, when you're 20 years old, you really don't have a lot of time or deep time at least, to spend, mature time to spend with a parent like that. So in writing about my father, I was able to look back and see the positive traits that he inspired with me. He was a hardworking man, always held two jobs, was a musician, was the one that got me interested in music initially. Um, my mother was the exact opposite. My mother was a schooled woman. She was an educator. She was a teacher, a guidance counselor for a school. She held a doctorate, which was unusual for an Italian woman back in the 50s and early 60s. So I grew up with a unique combination in Brooklyn of having an educated parent, a hardworking father, and on the streets of Brooklyn. And that the totality of that combination of a little street smarts and a little education, I think was a powerful tool in setting up my life and some of the better choices I've made moving forward. Also, some of the worst. We learn from our choices as we go forward, and we keep building upon who we are. So that's a little bit about my mom and dad. I have an older brother, my older brother, Joseph. He's 7.5 years my senior. And growing up in Brooklyn, it was always wonderful to have an older brother to fight your battles for you, so to speak. So I was off limits with a lot of the local bullies.
I know. I have a younger brother, Joseph, and I was the one who fought the battles for him.
So you knew entirely what that was about. But my brother was an extremely intelligent person. Again, educated from my mother. My mother educated us both early on in very much of a common sense, analytical approach. She was a math teacher. And so we were ingrained with a way of looking at problems and solving them. And my brother has an extremely high IQ. I've looked up to him like all younger brothers do. And throughout life, he's been my moral center and my go-to person. He's kept me honest on many of the things I've done. And to this day, I still owe him the respect of making me the person of who I am, obviously with the help of the foundations of my parents. But we've managed to kind of come together in Florida. I moved down in 81. He moved in 78, and it allowed us to reconnect on a mature level and integrate both of our families together. And that's something I'll be forever grateful for.
That's wonderful. I'm happy for you to have that. That is a blessing. So your brother was very influential. You went through school. I know that one of the things he did for you was to introduce you to a writer who has become another inspiration to you, and one that you've also chatted with me about many times, Ayn Rand. And that's quite a quality for your brother to pass on to you.
Well, the initial thing was growing up. It was kind of serendipitous the way it all happened. I was 16 years old, and I was a senior in high school at that point. And my brother came home one day and he threw me a book and he says, "Hey, you ought to read this." And he says, "I think you'll find some of the articles interesting." And it was a group of essays that were written in the early 60s by Ayn Rand. And it was a book called The Virtue of Selfishness, which kind of is an unusual title. It piqued my interest even at 16 years old. I gave it to my best friend in high school. He read it. And then we would get together with my brother and have late night discussions on the pros and cons, as intellectual as 16, 17-year-old kids could have. I found it, one of the tenets in that book is a reliance on reason and rational thought process and conceptualization. And that's something that was ingrained to me at my very early age, maybe 3 and 4 years old with my mother, because, as I said, she was a math teacher. So I got trained in an analytical way of looking at things and looking for answers. So in many ways, I was already set up with a metaphysical view of the world, of questioning the nature of things and why we're here and why things happen. And my method of acquiring that knowledge was set up through some kind of rational discourse, or at least a pursuit of rational interest. So when I received the virtuous selfish, that was the ethics portion of it, which basically said it was allowed to basically live for yourself. And man is basically, as all life forms are, a selfish, irrational selfishness. Uh, so the book fit in a philosophical void, even at 16, 17 years old, that I didn't know I was missing. Shortly after that, we started taking some courses at the Nathaniel Branden Institute, which was Ayn Rand's protege. And I worked in the book department there for several years, and I got to take all the courses and read all the literature, and I got to meet some great people, including Alan Greenspan back then in '68, and Alan Greenspan was old back at that time.
Yeah, right.
But we had many, many late night discussions, and that set up my foundations for the future and my moral center and my political views that have lasted me right up through today.
Up until last week when you gave me a paper of us to read. However, I don't want to leave that there for our viewers to think that you were strictly analytical and, an academic. At the same time,
Not at all.
you were playing drums in clubs and into the music side of the world when it was exploding all over Brooklyn and all over the world, actually. Tell us a little bit about your experience with music.
Again, goes back to my father. My father was a professional pianist as a second job, and he had an accordion, and I took a liking to drums. And at 5 or 6 years old, he would bring me home drumsticks and brushes, and I would set up boxes and various pots and pans around and make my own little makeshift drum set, playing to my brothers on what we would call the Victrola back then. Many of the people don't remember what a Victrola is, but the little 45 records of all the oldies from the 50s. And I would play along with them, eventually taking lessons, and my father playing accordion with me when I was 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, and eventually going for lessons and taking up the drums. And one thing my father always said to me, and I don't know whether to thank him or curse him for it, but he always says, music is a second job. It's a side job. And as much of a passion as I had for music, he always said, you need to go to college, you need to learn. And this is not a primary source of income. Well, I played with a lot of great musicians growing up in Brooklyn. We had a great pool of not only intellectual people, but creative people that came out of the Brooklyn schools and the Brooklyn education system, New York City education system in general. Many of the great writers, great scientists today, all developed from where we both went to school. And coming out of that, I was a musician, did my weekend jobs, and being an entrepreneurial spirit from, let's say, growing up on the streets of Brooklyn, always trying to make the extra buck, whether it was shoe shining at, 6 or 7 years old, trying that, or back then fireworks was a big thing. Make a couple extra dollars, maybe selling some fireworks and whatnot. We had traveled one I guess it was late month in late '69, about 50 miles away to see a concert with Leslie Weston Mountain. And it was about a 50-mile drive, and we got lost getting up there, and we came back. And in the car back, I threw out, I said, hey, why don't we do this at home? We can do this. There's no reason for why. Why should we travel 50 miles? I turned around and I went to my brother, my senior moral center, and also had a little entrepreneurial in him. We approached the idea with my aunt, who was the consummate entrepreneurial of our family. And we formed a corporation. And back in 1970, I raised $40,000 through a little limited partnership to put on initially 10 shows. We rented a theater and we went opposite the Fillmore East and had acts such as the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, the Byrds, and a host of others that were the true acts at that time. So it was quite an involvement into the production end of the music business. And only to find out that the music business was really a business and it wasn't what was led on to believe by the typical, let's say, the late 60s hippies that just thought music was free and everybody should have it. And, the actual musicians wanted to get paid a lot of money to play the theater. So
it wasn't so free when you had to pay $1 million bucks.
The realities of the money set in very quickly, but it was a learning curve that was, I wouldn't trade for anything else. I had a Harvard education in a matter of a year during that.
And I see in your book also, you talk about having motorcycles, many of which were stolen from you, but ultimately getting to Woodstock on one of them.
Yes, of course, it was 69 and Woodstock. We had two great events that happened in 69. One was obviously the landing of the Apollo on the moon, which just triumphed the greatness of man, of what he can accomplish when he sets his mind out towards accomplishing a goal. So that was my one side of me as I was going through college, to understand what is possible in a world of if you have the passion and desire to achieve. And on the other side, my creativity was my music. And this was billed as the biggest event. Nobody knew quite what it was going to be. And my girlfriend and I had a Sportster, and we just late one night, the night before, got on a motorcycle and drove up there and drove right up to the front of the stage, bypassed all the traffic, stayed for probably about 4 hours, watched a couple of groups. It was raining, it was muddy, it was dirty. And I decided to leave the first night and go stay in Ellenville at a hotel.
So you didn't see Jimi Hendrix do his magnificent...
No. Unfortunately, it was just another event at that time. And as I said, shortly after that is when I got involved in promoting the rock and roll shows, on my own. I said, this is something that we can do. From there, not only was I involved in music, but I befriended who turned out to be my closest friend and brother in the world, a fellow by the name of Benny Mardones, who was a genius, should have been one of the greats. He had a hit called Into the Night. It wasn't a hit once, it was a hit twice. And it has the distinction of being a 24th most played song on American radio. And we became extremely close friends and like I said, brothers from probably 1970 until he passed away just a year and a half ago. So he was my closest confidant and friend. And we had a hell of a roller coaster ride together.
And you write a terrific tribute to him in your book. It's worth reading just for that tribute. It was really beautiful.
As I was writing the stories, coincidentally, when I received the gift, COVID hit shortly after that. So we were kind of in a quasi-lockdown stage, not knowing what the future was going to bring us. So I began writing these stories about my past and the people that were important to me and things that changed my life. And some questions were just stock questions that were given to me out of StoryWorth. And so I wrote one question about what was the greatest prank you pulled. And it happened to be with Benny at an airport, which was, I wish we would have had a videotape of it, because it would have certainly made a reality show today. But when I sent that to Benny, Benny said to me, he says, well, when the hell are you going to write something about me? What, are you going to wait till I'm dead before you write something? So he guilted me into doing that. And for that Christmas of, actually it was 1970 at that point, I did do something. I flew out to California and wrote and gave him the story in a little book, which chronologized our 50-year journey together of the ups and downs, the good, bad, and the ugly of the rock and roll business. And he was just truly a magnificent talent, great songwriter, and more importantly, an honest brother that I can relate to. Closest thing to family one could ask for. You've
had quite a diversified journey, my friend, from an intellect, musician, a producer. I know you were in the mortgage business for a great deal of time that led you into buying the property that you ended up starting the restaurant in because you had enough. I think there was a restaurant there in the building when you bought it, right? That went bad and you took it over.
There was a restaurant that was defunct. We came in, we were looking to relocate our mortgage banking office. I was a true mortgage banker, you know, with your history in the business. The differentiation, I was under the mentoring program of Fannie Mae at that time. My first, I don't want to say my job because I was more of an independent contractor when I came down to Florida. I worked for Broward Federal in their mortgage department, and I was to go out and secure business for them on the mortgage side. And that developed me into the business. Basically, once you're a salesman, it doesn't matter whether you sell widgets, fireworks, music, or anything else. You're always, I don't want to say you're always a salesman, but you're always interacting with the public and striking up relations. And the relations are what's important. And in the mortgage business was something that integrity was a large part of it, because people are laying out the personal lives, their entirety of their lives to you in a short half-hour interview, and you need to uncover their credit, their money, where they work, the good, bad, the ugly of who they are, to be able to help them the best to secure them the financing. And we developed quite a large mortgage banking operation. And as I said, we were under the guys of Fannie Mae at that time as a direct lender. So that was able to give me control of underwriting and closing. And I got to learn the ins and outs of the mortgage business, and we rode it up through the entirety of the time of the busy times.
It's a great business. Last week I interviewed another fellow that I've known for many years. His name is Craig Davis. You may not remember his name, but Craig was the head of WAMU, who grew it to the biggest in the world. And while we were interviewing him, I said, well, give us a sense of the scope of the business. He had 18,000 employees, and they closed $1 billion worth of deals every day.
For those that don't know, WAMU was short for Washington Mutual, and that was one of the California or West Coast institutions that had some very novel lending practices with some of what we would call negative amortization loans. Or, we back in the 80s, we were in an extremely high interest rate market. So there had to be vehicles that were determined that would allow people to come in that would track the market as the rates would come down, so that they weren't pounded against the wall. And banks like Washington Mutual, California Federal, Savings of America was some of the ones that had very unique mortgage options for the buyer to allow them to have a piece of the American dream of the home ownership.
Yeah, they invented the adjustable rate mortgage.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did.
To the benefit and curse of many people. However, we're starting to run down on time, so I must get back to your comment. You only had one job in your whole life, and I know that story. So tell us about it briefly.
Well, growing up with parents who, worked jobs. Like I said, my mother worked forever as a teacher and a guidance counselor. My father working 2 jobs. The natural progression is when you get out of college, was to, get up in the morning, put on a suit, walk down to the subway station, buy the morning paper, get on the subway, take the church, the ride into Manhattan. And I was able to secure my first job at JCPenney, the retail outlet. Not in a retail position, but I was in the real estate department there at the main office in Manhattan. It was on 7th Avenue and between 7th and Broadway on 54th Street. And that was a job where I had a boss, and I had to go out and go through various areas of the country doing demographic studies to develop a report for which markets JCPenney wanted to go in and attach themselves to the malls. That's when the regional malls were becoming a popular go-to place at that time, attracting. So I got involved in the demographics and trying to do an actual study of the feasibility of the size store and the dollar volume they would do. Well, after working for them for maybe 2 years, I realized that it was very difficult for me to conform to the typical come in, have lunch, go out for an hour, come back, work. And even though I had much flexibility with the traveling that I was able to do around the country, I was able to walk the streets of Manhattan every day and spend hours outside of the office while still accomplishing the job that I needed to do. But I knew that there was a limitation in working for somebody, and I know it needed to be rewarded, not only financially but emotionally, in being able to produce something, to do something, to create something that would allow me to take me to wherever uh, my abilities would allow me to. Of course, we have bumpy roads getting to there, but there came a point, and I guess it was in probably 74, that it was just time. I developed a much closer relationship to my current wife then. She was always my soulmate, even from my earliest days. And we were able to reconnect and develop a relationship. I moved back to Brooklyn, and moving back to Brooklyn from out of Manhattan, I had to figure out how to earn some money, and I worked in real estate, one of the larger real estate things, but always maintained my own autonomy, both with working on the side, doing some side ventures, shall we say, as well as selling real estate in Brooklyn. From there, I knew that I can never take, shall we say, strict orders from somebody else. Now, that didn't mean I didn't respect my elders and my seniors. And, growing up in Brooklyn, you just learn to know your place in the hierarchy of who there is. But that was a situation that I knew I just had to go out and be my own person. And that's why at 20 years old, not only earlier was I playing as a musician, driving around Manhattan, earning extra money, but at 20 years old, we did the theater. And then from the theater, we got involved with, promoting, at that time, doing a documentary called Love, Peace, and Capitalism, because we had purchased the option rights to a major festival, which was Strawberry Fields Festival, that was done up in Toronto, Canada, that had all the major acts. And we were actually going to tell the story of the music business, with interspersing it with the actual music groups of the time, Grand Funk, Led Zeppelin. 10 years after, some of the larger groups that we had the rights to play, while we were telling the story of the business through the eyes of a young entrepreneur. And we actually secured the interest of one of the board members of Saucony Mobile, who loved the idea. And we started out with film crews. We did a telephone interview with Milton Friedman and some other people, just talking about the business. Again, being a philosophy buff in college and an economics major, it kind of just all fell into place in my early 20s. So again, my job was my job. It set me up to give me the parameters, but moving forward, I needed to be in control of my own destiny as an individual.
I could understand that fully, and I can tell you that I know many, many people who, like you and myself, determined early in life that if you're analytical, you judge what you think you know is the goal that you want to go to, and you're willing to take a risk, your life can be exponentially different. You can either plug along every day in the job, and there's nothing wrong with that for some people. They have to do it. For me, my head would have exploded. I had to go out and do something on my own, and I did it over and over again. And you just explained the same thing, the same reason why. You can't be locked into something for the rest of your life when you see so many other vistas.
You can't be tunneled down a particular path. It's really about a method of acquiring knowledge as you're moving forward. And I've always looked at, no matter what I did in life, it was a building block. You can always take something away. I always had a great deal of respect for people that were older than me, because they always had something to share. There was an experience that I wasn't aware of. And when you learn to put yourself in other people's shoes and look at things from their perspective, it gives you a broader tolerance on how to integrate all your past experiences, so that when you experience a new encounter moving forward, you're better prepared to size it up in a proper way, and kind of just be a good guy. It's much easier to be good. One of the chapters in my book, the question was, do you have a motto? And oddly enough, I thought long and hard about it because I needed to put something profound for my great grandchildren to read in 50 years. And my motto actually is a combination between something, a lyric by Toby Keith and an old saying by Mark Twain. And it's never right to do wrong, and it's never wrong to do right. And it's a very simple phrase, and we all know internally what's right and wrong. And if you live by that, you never have to
And
look
it
back
takes the
over your
courage to
shoulder.
do it. Takes
Well,
the courage
yes,
to do
but
it.
that builds your integrity, and your integrity is what moves forward to give you your credibility and your accountability. Accountability and credibility is what builds your integrity. The money comes and goes. Money has no
That's
soul.
right.
The only
That's
thing you
right.
have is your persona, is who you are as a
That's right.
person. Every person's an individual. We don't rely on our ancestry. If I had being of Italian descent, if I had one grandfather was Al Capone, that didn't make me a gangster. And if the other grandfather was Leonardo da Vinci, it didn't make me a great inventor. It
Also,
was up to
ironically, since you're saying that, on the back of your book, it says, born in the village of Pozzuoli, Italy, the stunning Sophia Loren once pointedly said, there is a fountain of youth. It is your mind, your talents, the creativity you bring to your life, and the lives of people you love. When you learn to tap this source, you will truly have defeated age. So even
yes.
though your people came from the same town, you're not Sophia Loren, but you're trying to live by that slogan.
Well, it's very true. In writing the book, I looked for some very poignant quotes, and obviously, she fit the bill in many times. Not only is she a beautiful actress that we all grew up with, but being born in Pozzuoli, Italy, there was a connection there, and coming across that quote is, and one of the greatest pleasures of life. Listen, we are all social creatures. We don't live on an island.
That's
We
right.
interact with other people,
Right.
and one of the
We
greatest
live in the
joys we can
community
have.
of man. That's right.
We are a community, and it's about going along and getting along with other people. It doesn't mean you compromise your own sense of values, but you learn how to integrate with other groups of people and look at people, as Martin Luther King said, by the content of their character, by what they've contributed, by their belief systems, by the goodness in them and what they portray. We've all grown up. We've been a little sheltered in our life, although it's probably coming back to haunt us in our later life. Coming from, like I said, this idyllic father's knows best generation, we didn't have many of the adversities of World War I, World War II, the Depression that our parents went through. That set up that culture of individualism, of that you can conquer, that there's nothing so bad that you can't overcome if you put your mind to it and your values are in the right position. So I've lived my life that way. I've tried never to do wrong. That doesn't mean I know everything. It doesn't mean I haven't committed errors. But the key to growing is to be able to learn from your errors and correct them. So as you move forward, you add something onto the next person. And if you can change one life as you move forward in life, you've accomplished something. You've put your footprint in the sand, so to speak, because you can only change one mind at a time, one
That's
life
right.
at a time.
And that's how we
And
change the world. One hand reaching to another. That's it.
it's an individual effort. There's no such thing
Right.
as a collective mind. If you change a group of people and you sway them one way, they could be swayed another way. So people have to come to their own epiphany of what's right and wrong and what's good and bad, and either enjoy the rewards of their decisions or suffer the consequences.
Ed, I don't want to cut you short, but I've got a minute or two before it goes black. I just want to thank you for being on the show. It was great, and I enjoyed it immensely. And we'll discuss it further at lunch soon, I'm sure.
along with the article that I gave you. So yes,
Yes,
you will
along with
continue to
that.
get homework from me.
So I just want to quote one thing that you wrote in your book here. Not only has my life matured through the 4 seasons, but throughout that journey, I've become seasoned, recurrently adding knowledge, insight, and tolerance to those experiences. This endeavor has allowed me a cathartic introspection as I've reflected over the years, understanding the traditions, associations, understandings, and happenings which together with my heritage form my lasting legacy. The totality of the title is indicative of my thoughts, attitude, and behavior. It's the acceptance of what I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. The eloquent simplicity of this statement sums up my spiritual core and essence. It's amazing that you close with that prayer, because I say that prayer constantly.
That was the inspiration for the title. But thank you very much. This was an honor, and please send my love to your lovely wife. And once again, a happy and a healthy new year to you and your family.
Now, I have to close down here and say goodbye to the folks, and then we're going to be over. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you're watching this, I hope you have got as much inspiration and insights today as I did in talking to my old friend here and seeing new sides and new shadows of who he is, and recognizing that we all have an opportunity to reach out one to another, to tell our story, to share it with another person. And I encourage you, your story is unique to you. You're the only one who has it. You're the only one who can share it. Write it down before it's lost. Allow it to become your legacy to your family and to your friends. Allow it to help change another human being's life, because it is important for us to realize, as Ed and I just agreed, we live in the community of man, and we are all eligible to help one another. We all have the core of what's necessary, and that's a beating heart and a willing soul. So we reach out to one another. God bless you all, and we will see you soon. Thank you for tuning into the show. I hope that it resonated with you. It certainly did with me. And I hope it encouraged you to realize the true power of your story. As a reminder, new episodes will be released Wednesday mornings on your favorite podcast apps, and also on YouTube as well. Be sure to like, subscribe, and turn your notification button on to ensure that you receive updates on new episode releases. I'm grateful for your reviews and your support. The love is certainly felt. Keep it coming. You can reach out to connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, or stop by my website, toeverypageofturning.com. All links are clickable in the show notes for quick access. Do you think that you or someone you know may be our most inspiring guest yet? Let's hope so. Click on our contact page and get in touch on my website and share your story. I look forward to reading each one personally. My best-selling book, To Every Page of Turning, which was published by Mascot Books, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, and many more popular book retailers. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Till next time, remember that every day is a new opportunity to write your new page in your incredible journey. And it is incredible. You're the only one who has it.